I was walking to Boise, going through the region between Idaho and Oregon. Come on. Don't just sit there looking at me as if you really believe this. For one thing, do I look like I walked to Boise? So, what's wrong with that statement? There is no region between Boise and Idaho, but also, no matter how far I walk in the region between Idaho and Oregon, would I ever reach Boise? No. Today's story in Luke begins in this very way. It begins with Jesus walking to Jerusalem, in an area that'll never get him to Jerusalem, walking in the region between Samaria and Galilee. Well, there is no region. It's like Oregon and Idaho. Was he straddling the boundary? But it says it was a region between the two, which then leads us to think, wow, does that mean that the author is saying he didn't belong either to Samaria or to Galilee? Or perhaps in this region he belonged both to Samaria and to Galilee. We know that that was an uncomfortable border, that the Jews, Galilee, and the sort of Jews in Samaria didn't like one another. We know that the Samaritans were not a popular people, but do you know why? Do you know why? It's because the ones who were living in Samaria, the Samaritans, did not worship. They did not look at Jerusalem and the temple in Jerusalem as being the center, the holy place, the center of worship. And so for that reason, they were not really considered all that Jewish. They were Gentiles rather than true Jews, and they were disliked because of that. So the way that story begins tells us that we need to open our eyes, that something's not quite right here. And so we need to see this story with open eyes. So the story continues on. So he was walking in this area between, and suddenly there were 10 people, 10 men with leprosy. Well, I love the way that's stated, because it wasn't that there were 10 lepers. That's not how the original was written. Jesus saw those people in all their humanity. He didn't say 10 lepers. It was there were 10 men. He recognized them for who they were first, as people, and then people who happened to have a disease of leprosy. So he saw them as whole, complete people. Well, these lepers saw, I should be more sensitive, these people with leprosy, how ironic, they saw Jesus. But did they really see Jesus with understanding? Because earlier in the book of Luke, Jesus heals a man with leprosy. And how does he heal him? The man walked up to Jesus, and Jesus touched the man with leprosy, and the man was healed. In this story, the people with leprosy cried out, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." And they kept their distance, which makes you wonder, if they had really saw Jesus for who he was, would they have kept their distance? Or would they have gone up to him confident that he would be able to heal them? But they kept their distance. From a distance, they cried out. And Jesus did something odd. He didn't heal them right there. He didn't say, "You are healed." Instead, all he said was, "Go and have the priests see you. Be seen by the priests. Go to the priests to be cleansed." And so these 10 men didn't ask any questions. They knew that the people who had the ability to declare them cleansed, that God would work through these people, were the priests. And so, without asking any questions, they just went. Well, there were 10 of these people with leprosy, very soon we find out that one of them was different than the rest. One of them was a Samaritan. Now, the interesting thing about that is that even in leper colonies, they probably would have all stuck together with their own kind. But the disease was so great that somehow they became blind to the differences among them. Well, when they went to go see the priests, and we are not told if they go to the priests in Samaria or the ones in Jerusalem, we assume that it's in Jerusalem, the one notices, recognizes, he sees that he has been cleansed. And his response to seeing that, the only one who saw that, although the others must have seen, they must have noticed that they were healed. But the others kept going. Only the one saw that he was healed and truly understood what that meant. Understood that it wasn't the priests who needed to cleanse him, but that he'd already been cleansed by God. And so he turned around, the only one to turn around, and he was singing praises to God for this cleansing. And he returned to Jesus, where he lay down flat, face down on the ground before him, to say, thank you, recognizing, seeing who Jesus truly was. And Jesus looked at this man and he saw him, and he said, you're a Samaritan. Weren't there 9 others? But they didn't see. And so Jesus said to this foreigner, to the Samaritan, your faith has made you well. But the word well in the book of Luke is used elsewhere. It's the same word that is used for saved. Your faith has saved you. Much more than cleansing. His faith has made his eyes open, so he recognized God. Let's hear this story as it comes to us from Luke.
Now, on his way to Jerusalem, Jesus traveled in the region between Samaria and Galilee. As he was going into a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him. They stood at a distance and called out in a loud voice, Jesus, Master, have pity on us. When he saw them, he said, Go show yourselves to the priests. And as they went, they were cleansed. One of them, when he saw he was healed, came back, praising God in a loud voice. He threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him, and he was a Samaritan. Jesus asked, Were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Was no one found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner? Then he said to him, Rise and go. Your faith has made you well.
There are times in our lives when we are like the 9 who were blinded to what had happened to them. When we are not able to see all of the blessings that have been given to us. Sometimes we're not able to see those blessings for what they are, recognize them, because we're in crisis. Just like those men with leprosy who were in crisis, so much crisis that they didn't even notice that there was a foreigner among them. They were blind to that. We become blind. That when we're in crisis, we tend to become insular. Sometimes the expression is that we put blinders on because we're so hyper-focused on whatever the issue is at hand. There was a time when Sarah and Sean, my 2 oldest children, were young, and one day I was following them to the bus stop. They were running on ahead. Well, Sarah, when she was young, she had a tethered spinal cord and issues that went along with that, and so I was always concerned about her health. But Sean had a seizure disorder where he would have grand mal seizures that once they started would last 2 or 3 hours. And at the end of each one, there was more brain damage. And so as I saw these 2 children running on ahead of me to the bus stop, I looked And I found myself thinking, oh, they would be so perfect if they didn't have these issues. And my eyes were opened. At that very moment, I realized what it was that I was thinking. I was not identifying my children as the incredible people that they are. I was seeing them with blinders on, only for the issues that they had. And I vowed never to do that to my kids again. But when we are grieving, when we are hurting for whatever reason, it's hard to look around. And so I've told my kids through the years some advice that I was given when I was young. And that's that when you're feeling down, you go around very often with your eyes half closed, right? Have you seen people that you can tell by their expressions that they're going through difficult times? Their eyes, they look down, their eyes are partially shut. And so I've told my kids that when you're going through difficult times, it's even more important to stand up straight, to hold your head high, and to open your eyes. Let more light in. Look around you. And when you do, you notice all sorts of things that you didn't notice before. Open your eyes wide and take a look. So now whenever they go through really difficult times, and Sarah in Idaho Falls, we'll be talking on the phone, and she'll say, "Don't worry, Mom, my eyes are open wide." The other time that we're sometimes unable to recognize the things around us, the beauty, is when things are so familiar. We bought a house, my first house that I've owned. I bought it just this last spring. And I bought it partially, yes, I love the house, but I also love the view from the second floor. Wherever you look out a window on the second floor, you can see mountains in the distance. So do you know how much time I spend in front of the window looking out at the mountains? I never look outside at these mountains. I know that they're there, and I take them for granted until someone else comes into the house and they're walking around and they say, "Wow, you've got an incredible view from every window upstairs." And it's like, "Oh yeah, we do." But we take things for granted when they become that familiar. We develop a familiarity blindness. And so we forget very often to give thanks to God for the things in our lives, the blessings, because we forget that we have those blessings in our lives. It happens even in church. It's one of the reasons that the order of worship is different today. When we do things in the same order of worship every week, we begin taking things for granted, and we begin just going through the rote motions rather than truly appreciating with our eyes wide open what it is that we are doing in worship every Sunday. Well, when we recognize the blessings that are in our lives because our eyes are opened, we don't feel like things are too familiar, we're actually looking for those blessings, what is the response that we have? Like the Samaritan who recognized that he had been healed, our response is to sing praises to God. And so for the rest of this worship service today, we will be praying, we will be bringing forth our gifts to God, we will be purely worshiping God with our whole beings this day on Thanksgiving Sunday. Amen.